As you all know, 2 weeks ago, we held our march here in Morristown and over 13,000 people attended, the largest march in New Jersey. While that was incredible, that cannot be the end of this movement. Gun violence is a serious issue that affects truly everyone and will not stop until we do something about it. One of the biggest things that we've been advocating for is the importance of voting. The only way we are going to make change happen is by voting for an administration that supports change. With the upcoming election for Congress, we have an opportunity to do so. Therefore, we are here today to find out what each of our congressional candidates will do to keep us safe. We invited all the candidates in District 11 who filed a petition, as well as our current representative, Congressman Rodney Frelinghuysen, although several declined due to scheduling issues. I would like to point out that we had candidates rearrange their whole schedules, including shortening their family vacation just to be here. Thanks, Mikey. So take note of who is not here, because if our safety was their priority, they would be here right now. Once again, I would like to thank you all for being here today, and with that, I would like to hand the mic over to an amazing student and our moderator for today, Caitlin Dempsey.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Dempsey, and I am a senior at Randolph High School. I'm going to be moderating today's town hall. Here is a rundown of the rules for the audience. Each candidate will be asked a question by the 7 students and will have 120 seconds, 2 minutes to respond. Alexandra Stevens, if you could stand up right there, will be keeping time and providing time signals. Student moderators may ask follow-up questions if need be. Candidates must be respectful to other candidates and student moderators. They must observe the time restraints without question. Candidates should answer all questions directly, and if they wish to use their time to answer a previous question, they may, but will be given no extra time. We discourage directly naming opponents in responses, and may allow a candidate to respond to personal accusations. This event is nonpartisan, and participation does not indicate support or endorsement by the March for Our Lives movement or NJ11 for Change. There will be no campaign materials or literature soliciting funds or volunteers at the town hall location. The questions will now begin. The candidates will now have 2 minutes to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Patrick Olota.
Dad, we are going to die. Dad, we are going to die. Those were the words that were spoken to me, yelled at me 6 years ago when my son and I were en route from our hotel to the United States Embassy in Luanda, Angola, on the west coast of Africa. Our taxi that we took from the hotel to the embassy went to an abandoned area, stopped, the driver got out of the car, my son yelled, "Dad, this isn't right, we need to run." And I got out of the car, we jumped out of the car, but as soon as we jumped out of the car, we were surrounded by 20 men with AK-47 assault rifles trained directly on us, yelling at us in Portuguese, pushing us up against their vehicles, ramming the barrels of those guns into our backs and at the base of our head. My son yelled, "Dad, we are going to die." We were then held hostage for 49 days in the African Republic of Angola. For day 48, another group of men brandishing massive firepower entered where we were staying, pushed in on our door and said, "Are you the Alacos?" And of course it was a rhetorical question. They said, "We are here to take you home." And our elite special forces, that to this day chokes me up. I have experience with 2 very different scenarios using guns, and 2 very different outcomes. And one was horrific, one was terrifying, the other was the greatest sense of relief that anyone could experience. I am here today as a direct result of the events that transpired in Angola. I am here because I came back to a country that I believe has been, where the republic has been hijacked and corrupted by special interest groups on both sides of the aisle, and extremism on both sides of the aisle. And I have come up with a platform that addresses this by creating a website called hearourvote.org, which enables every single registered voter in the 11th district to vote on every single bill directly to me as your congressman, and I will vow to vote the will of the people. And that is why I'm here today, because I know you want change, and I want change, and maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Colbert, would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Mitchell Colbert, and actually as a veteran, I applaud all of the veterans in this country, and thank God you're back safe. I've been a resident of Morristown for 34 years. My children actually went to this school. My children attended Morristown High School. I care about the students in this district. I care about the students in Morristown and throughout this state. When Parkland happened, I went to the New Jersey 11th for Change office of Congressman Frelinghuysen, and I saw a student there, one of the high school students, out in the middle of the street, talking about how he was now afraid to go into his school, how the same thing could happen to him. Just after he spoke, a teacher addressed the crowd, and that teacher was crying in the middle of the street. And that teacher said that she would have given her life for her students. She knew, and she told us, that she knew that every teacher would have given their lives for their students too. That cannot happen in this country. Every student has to feel as protected in their schools as they are at home. I also met all of the Parkland students in Livingston. I spoke to every single one of them, and I made a vow to them. And I said that if elected, I vow to make sure that federal law is changed so that every single assault weapon is made a crime. Anybody who has an assault weapon is committing a crime. There has to be a buyback program so that there are no assault weapons on the street. Thank you.
Tamara Harris, would you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tamara Harris, and it is extremely humbling to be with our students here today who have focused on taking a Saturday, and everyone else here in the room who is here to make sure that we are creating a movement and making sure that what is happening around this country begins to dissipate as we move towards a never again outcome. I'm a mother, I'm a businesswoman, and I'm an advocate, and I have two daughters. One is a junior in high school, so much like the young women here on the platform, I am intimately connected to the fear and trauma that they are experiencing at this stage in their life. And I also have a daughter who is a sophomore in college. What I will say is that we have been here before in this country. When we moved from horse and buggy to automobiles, and people said cars kill people kill people, not cars. And no one wanted to make sure that there were things like seatbelts and safety bags, airbags in cars to make sure that people were safe in this country. And yet here we are today with a vehicle that can be an instrument of death, but people have to take tests, they have to get a license, they have to drive under the instruction of qualified, experienced people. And I don't believe that we don't have the capacity in this country to do the same thing about guns in this country. I don't own a gun, I never will own a gun. And I can tell you as a social worker, I have worked with people in communities. As a young woman who came from a family of very, very low means, I have been around family members in the Bronx, in public housing, and have heard gunshots as I've been staying with my aunt and other relatives as a young teenager. And that fear and anxiety and PTSD that our young kids are experiencing in this country today, I am doing everything I can to make sure that we treat this as a public health crisis, a public safety crisis, and we come at it from very different solutions because it is much more than a Second Amendment right. It is the right to pursuit of life, liberty, and justice, and the pursuit of happiness, and that is what I'm going to fight for our young adolescents and for everyone else in this country. Thank you.
Martin Wood, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mark Hewitt. I want to thank the organizers of the event for having me here today. I also want to say how important it is, because it's not about all of us on this stage, it's about all of you, that we all get together, come together and do that which is right, and make sure that while the Second Amendment exists and people do have a right to carry guns, more importantly is people have a right to come to school and feel safe. And for those of you who say, well, we're just high school students, for those of you who are 17 years of age, when my dad was that age, he was in Italy fighting World War II, so you are all adults. And you are all empowered from this point on, actually from, unfortunately, February 14th on, to solve the problems that other generations, your parents and grandparents, created. I think that it's interesting to note that in the election of 1912, Theodore Roosevelt talked about the fact that the Republican Party had reached a turning point where it had, quote, lost its soul and cared more about special interests. Both parties have gone through that over the years, but we obviously know that's happening again now on the right. What's important for us all to realize is that we are all Americans. We are not Republicans or Democrats when it comes to gun violence. We must work together, we must work peacefully, but we must also understand that this is a bigger problem than just today. It's about the future, it's not just about the students of today, it's about your children and your grandchildren. So I think all of us here on the stage are here not to talk about us, but to talk about you and how to solve the problems that affect all of us deeply. Thank you.
Mikey Sherrill, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mikey Sherrill. Thank you so much to all of the student moderators, to NJ11 for Change, and to all of you, the audience participants, for coming out today to talk about this really important issue. I think we're all here to some extent because we're so concerned about what's going on in Washington. And yet I think the silver lining is to see all of the active participation in our democratic process that has come about because of that. You know, nowhere is that more evident than here in the 11th District of New Jersey. So we saw 15,000 people on the Morristown Green for the Women's March. We had the biggest march for our lives here in Morristown in the state, and it was all student-led. It's been an incredible experience. And I think a lot of you are here today for some of the same reasons that I'm running for Congress, because we've seen our values under attack. So we've seen attacks on women's rights and minority rights, on the values enshrined in our Constitution, and the very things that we know support our democracy, like freedom of the press. And so as a former Navy helicopter pilot and a federal prosecutor, I'm here today because I fought my entire life for this country, and I'm going to continue to do so. And so we need to take a really strong stand on these important issues. We know that almost all Americans agree that we need universal background checks. We know that people want to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous individuals. And we know that we can get this done because we've seen an active electorate here in the 11th District that demanded new leadership in Washington. And that's exactly what I want to provide when I go down to Congress. So I'm going to advocate strongly for gun safety regulations, and I'm going to do it with all of you here today. Thank you so much.
Mark Washburn, would you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, friends, neighbors, and more importantly, students. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. My name is Mark Washburn. For the last 26 years, I've been teaching college. In fact, it was a first Saturday in April of 1992 that I taught my first college class. I was World Geography at Berkeley College of Business. I also have an MBA. I spent 10 years in business before becoming a teacher. I'm also an author. I wrote a book about my cousin. Actually, it's a 7-volume series on my cousin. He was a Civil War congressman. So this book was written in 2000, or published in 2000, this one 2016, and there's 6 books in between. So I've spent a lot of time researching Congress, teaching about government, teaching about history, and now I am seeking to use that knowledge to represent you in the 11th Congressional District. I guess as a teacher I should start off by saying, I do not have any weapons on me right now. I know our president wants us to start arming our teachers out there. I don't think that's a great idea, right? We should be teaching and not being involved in that type of work. Let's face it, other countries do not allow their citizens to have the type of rights that we have when it comes to guns. America makes up about 4.4% of the population, but we have 42% of the guns in America. This has led to in 2016, over 38,000 deaths by guns in America. It came out to 96 Americans each day dying. It comes out to about 13,000 on average each year. For every one person killed, there are 2 injured for that same thing. Other countries, again, do not allow us to do this, but I want to find some sensible things, so thank you for setting this up for us on gun safety.
Our first question will come from Bella Bamani, a sophomore at West Morris Mendham High School.
Where do you stand on banning assault-style rifles or semi-automatic weapons?
The first responder will be Patrick Aloka.
Thank you. Again, I'd just like to briefly say that everything that I'm telling you are my personal beliefs, but when it comes to voting my platform, I will check my ideology and convictions at the door for whatever the people vote in the Hear Our Vote app and website. So, to answer your question, I am for the banning of all military-grade weapons that are made and created for a battlefield. They should not be on our streets.
Thank you. The message again is clear, as I said before. All semi-automatic, automatic weapons have to be banned federally. There should be a mandatory or compulsory buyback program so that one way or another, every single person in this country that has in their possession any kind of assault weapon is committing a crime. That's my position.
I am for the complete ban of assault-style weapons, semi-automatic weapons. They have no purpose in civilian life, and as we can see, they further serve to terrorize us when people are struggling with challenges, and when we have young adolescents that are struggling with impulse control. Having access to these guns creates these outcomes that we're here, that now land us here in these platforms to talk about why kids are being shot in school and why we're even having the insane conversation of arming teachers in school. But the thing that I want to make sure that this audience knows, and that I feel very passionately about, is that we have to take this conversation to a much higher level. Because you can go on Amazon and buy a drone. And what happens when now that drones that are being used for photos and fun little opportunities and delivering packages become weaponized? We have to have a philosophical conversation about public safety in this country. We need research, and it starts with the easy decision of assault weapons and assault rifles, but we have to be prepared to research this, fund this through Congress, and make sure that we are thinking proactively, because as we see with Facebook and all of these other situations, Americans give up a lot of their rights and a lot of access to defend things that begin to traumatize us later on. And so I would encourage everyone to think intentionally and on a higher level about these issues, as I will if I'm privileged enough to go and serve you in Congress. Thank you.
I think everyone up here is in agreement as to the banning of assault-style rifles and semi-automatic weapons. That being said, we really have to understand that the Second Amendment never spoke to these particular weapons. They didn't exist back then. And quite frankly, you know, if you have a handgun to protect your home or property, that may be one thing. If you go hunting and you have a rifle, that may be another. Why would you need an assault weapon other than to kill people on a massive level? It makes no sense at all. Saying that they're banned does not mean that you don't believe that there is something called the Second Amendment. It's just common sense. You need to get those weapons off the street that are meant for one purpose and one purpose only: murder. Thank you.
So I joined the Navy when I was 18 and left home to go to the Naval Academy, and that's the first time I qualified as an expert in shooting the M16 assault rifle. I know these weapons as a veteran. I'm familiar with these weapons, and make no mistake, they are weapons of war. They are weapons that were designed to kill as many people as possible in wars like Vietnam and Iraq. They have no place on the streets in New Jersey. And we should not have the ability to simply go to a sporting goods store and pick one up. These weapons are very dangerous, but we know that an assault weapons ban can work because we saw the rate of violent gun crimes and deaths go down in 1994 when we did have an assault weapons ban in place. And we need to advocate for a new assault weapons ban. Thank you.
I also support banning assault weapons and semi-assault weapons. Let's face it, Bambi, I've lived in Morris County since 1969. Bambi is really all over the place and they're getting tougher. But really, I mean, do we need these type of weapons on our streets? I don't think so. I think that we need to have sensible gun control. I mentioned we had 38,000 people who were killed in 2016. We can compare that to Japan. Last year, they were about a third of our population. We had 38,000, they had 6 gun deaths. We have to do something. We have to be smarter. We have to do better. We have to have this on a federal level because we have porous borders. Our governor was quoting that last year we had 480 gun deaths here in New Jersey. 80% were traced to guns outside of New Jersey. So we need legislation not just in New Jersey, but federally. So I would, if I'm so lucky to go to Washington, that's what I would be advocating. Thank you.
The second question will come from Karina Pacheco, a junior at the Academy of St. Elizabeth.
Do you have political ties with the NRA? And how will you prevent the NRA from pushing unsafe regulations and laws in Washington?
The first person to answer will be Mitchell Colbert.
I have no ties to the NRA. I will never have any ties to the NRA. I will accept no contributions from the NRA. So that part of the answer is very clear. But I think that we have to address the bigger issue, and that is special interests. And we have to address the forcefulness that some of these special interests exert on our elected officials. What we have today, as evidenced by our high school students in Parkland and here today, is an opportunity to seize some of the initiative and some of the momentum against the special interests, especially the NRA. I applaud the students here today. I applaud the students and encourage them to continue this fight against assault weapons, against guns, against violence, against special interests, against the NRA. If elected, I will do everything I can to follow their lead. They have shown us the example, and we, as elected officials, have to follow. They've shown us the example, and we have to follow their lead, all of us, and we have to elect officials that follow common ground, common sense solutions to some of these issues that are so important to us all. Thank you.
So I have no political ties to the NRA, no fiscal ties to the NRA. I will work vigorously to receive an F, and I've usually been on the dean's list at school, but I will work overtime to get my F rating from the NRA. But the one thing that I want to say is that, part of my background in advocacy is I work with families in deep crisis, usually protracted, high conflict transitions. And that's where I think we are in this country with respect to gun control, gun reform. And I will tell you that statistics have shown and studies have shown that as many Americans that want gun reform, you have members in the NRA that are just as horrified by what's going on in this country. They have children, and the issue that we're talking about at this table today transcends party affiliation, NRA, non-NRA affiliation, and part of my work as a social worker is to sit with people in very difficult spaces and try to work with them where they're at and move to an outcome. So I will tell you that I have family in the military, I have family members and friends who own guns, and I know people who are NRA members, but I've also talked to mothers and fathers who have teenage kids and are horrified by what's going on in Parkland. So for me, to defeat the NRA and to literally rip their fingers off the chokehold that they have in this country and our Congress, it's going to take money and it's going to take a movement. And we cannot sit and insult. We have to inspire. We have to inspire people that are just as fearful for their children's safety and their safety as well. And we're going to have to be very, very diligent in removing the financial benefits that the NRA gets for supporting Congress people, holding them accountable and making sure that they're not using federal resources or benefits from being an institution that benefits from federal law and doing things like funding programs or educating or interacting with people that are then now going out and hurting our communities. So those are the ways that I would be working to impact the NRA.
I have absolutely no ties with the NRA. The day after Parkland, I actually went onto Twitter and I took a pledge that I have not, am not, and will not ever take money from the NRA. But more importantly than that is I've also said that if I get to Congress, I have made a pledge to support the 28th Amendment, which will remove money from politics, because therein lies the problem right now. The House does not belong to the people. It belongs to the donors, the large donors and special interests, and we have to take the country back. I think that one of the most important things, though, to understand, we have to realize this with all groups, whether we call ourselves Republicans or Democrats, people make assumptions without getting to know the individual people. I do know NRA members. They are not inherently monsters. I think it's the leadership that are the monsters. I actually did go on Twitter after going around and getting my signatures for to get on the ballot. And one thing I noticed is that people understand the difference. And there's a big difference between the Second Amendment and a terrorist organization trying to manipulate us. So if there's any doubt, we all have to stand tall and make sure that we work against the special interests. The largest and most damaging one and damning one is the NRA. Thank you.
So I can assure you that not all members of the NRA are monsters, because my father's a lifetime member. He has told me he will be giving up his membership, so here's hoping. But I think we need to realize that even though members of the NRA might not be bad actors, the organization itself, as you said, is an incredibly bad actor here. I have not taken any money from the NRA. I do not intend to. I don't have any political ties to the NRA. What we need to acknowledge is that the NRA is simply a gun manufacturing lobby. They're not a constitutional lobby. They're not a sportsman's lobby or a hunting lobby. They are lobbyists for gun manufacturers. And their agenda is to make money for gun manufacturers. And right now they have spent almost $500 million in money that we can trace on campaigns and lobbying efforts. That's just the money we can trace. There's a lot of dark money in politics. And so we don't even know the true amount of money that the NRA puts into our political system. But I think that's exactly right. We have got to get this money out of politics. So I'm very proud to say that I've been endorsed by End Citizens United. That is a group that is working hard to get more transparency into our campaign finance laws. I think that can be helpful. And I also think movements like the students' movement going on right now is critically important to ending the stranglehold that the NRA has on some of our gun safety regulations or lack thereof. These students have presented really a strength against the NRA that I simply have not seen before, and I am incredibly impressed. So I'm very hopeful right now that we can end this stranglehold, really, that the NRA has had on our gun safety regulations.
I also do not take money from the NRA. In fact, I don't take money from anybody. When I got into this race, I was concerned about money in politics.
Fast track. I have no ties to the NRA, and I have not accepted any money from the NRA. But to answer the question, and many have hit on it, the NRA is a special interest. We have many special interests. How do we marginalize special interests? By what I'm saying to you today. Give democracy back to the people. And I have a plan for giving democracy back to the people. It's allowing you to vote on every issue. How does that work? Very simply. You log onto the website, you'll have any upcoming bills for the week in very plain language. You can read the bills. It will give the Republicans the perspective on the bill, pros and cons, the Democrats, pros and cons, the congressman's take, and a vote button. You vote your belief on that issue, and whatever the tally is, that's what I vote in Congress. If we allow people to take back their government, you will marginalize special interest politics.
The third question will come from Isabella Bosrock, a senior at West Forest Mendham High School.
Do you support specific legislative changes such as repealing the Dickey Amendment, which is a provision that was first inserted as a rider in the 1996 federal government omnibus spending bill, which mandates that none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control, and this amendment was lobbied for by the NRA?
The first candidate to answer will be Tamara Harris.
Thank you. So one of the things that I have persistently spoken about as I've made my way around the district is the fact that as a social worker, I believe very strongly, again, that we are facing a public health crisis and a public epidemic in this country when it comes to the excess supply of guns, and then that mix and cocktail of guns with adolescents and all kinds of other sort of domestic trauma in this country. So affecting the Dickey Amendment is number one on my platform, because I've always advocated for the Center for Disease Control to be funded and for those restrictions to be removed, because again, my background is not only social work and advocacy, it's finance. As an equity research analyst, I can tell you, you cannot manage what you can't measure. And the NRA has been very effective in making sure that we cannot manage gun crisis in this country and gun deaths in this country, because they've made sure that we can't measure it. And so that would be one of the first things that I would do in Congress. I would be fighting vigorously for appropriation resources for the CDC. But the other thing that I think is a side to that as well is, as you know, we're coming up on our census. And you have to think very intentionally of the people that you're sending to Congress, because you can have the one piece where you're managing and measuring, but if you're not making sure that we are adequately counted in communities, especially communities of color, who have been dealing with gun violence for decades. I know this personally because of the work I do in the social work community, that we have to do this through the census as well, because that's going to determine how resources are allocated, public health resources. And as a social worker, I truly believe that if you look at this from a public health perspective, the solution will be putting more healers and helpers in school, especially during adolescent crises, as opposed to armed teachers, and taking away from the education and the safe community that all children deserve in this country.
I am certainly in favor of repealing the Dickey Amendment. Some interesting things to note is that there have been continued attempts to do that over the years, and in fact, Congressman Dickey actually came out against the amendment later on in his career, or at least upon his retirement. What's even more interesting, and I don't think people realize this, and I've read the articles, I haven't scanned the omnibus bill to confirm it, but from what I understand, when Trump signed the omnibus bill, it actually allows for somebody to come in to be allowed for research, and I don't think he knew that was in there. So, which is the advantage of having a bill that is so large that nobody can read it, they just vote for it and don't realize they may be voting for something they don't agree with. And I think that sometimes there's some good in that. So I think that maybe we're on our way to repealing it now, or at least empowering and funding the CDC for the research that they desperately need to conduct. And we can just be hopeful that when one of us gets there in January, we'll be able to continue the mission of making sure that the Dickey Amendment is permanently put to rest. Thank you.
So yes, it was great to see that in the new omnibus bill, we now are allowed to study gun violence. That was language in the omnibus bill that just passed. However, there was no funding for the CDC to study gun violence. So as you all know, that half measure is simply not incredibly helpful because we need the money to the CDC to really study this epidemic. And make no mistake, this is a public health crisis. And in every other case of public health crises, we study it with the CDC. So we need to fund the CDC and make sure we're studying this crucial piece. So overturning the Dickey Amendment would be fine, but right now the language has been cleared up, but we really need that funding piece. Thank you.
For years, the NRA has been telling us that guns in our homes protect us. They protect families. So in 1993, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention wanted to look into it. They did a study, and the study said no. Actually, what happens is having a gun in your house actually brings more risk to your family. It was brought home in my family. I had a brother-in-law who got involved in a drunk driving incident. He went home, the cops followed him, and instead of dealing with it, he took his life with a gun. So for me, this is a personal thing. Having a gun in your house makes it more riskier for your family. So I think it's important that we study it, that we look into it. I mentioned 38,000, 2/3 were suicides. And that's something that we have to look at too. We just can't talk about homicides. Having guns in your house makes it riskier. That's why NRA started in 1995 pushing for it. And in 1996, they did pass that Dickey Amendment saying, okay, we're not even going to look at it. We're not even going to study it. Well, it's important that we do study it, not only for homicides, but for suicides and for all gun-related deaths.
I too am in favor of repealing the Dickey Amendment. I'm also for transparency in government, and why bury amendments like this in large, difficult to read 2,200 page or 2,300 page omnibus bills to begin with. I'm also for the spending of money for mental health research, where I think is really the real crux that we need to look into. That's it.
The easy answer is yes. I am in favor of repealing, definitely the Dickey Amendment. But let's back up a little and see why it was there. And when we look at that, we see the force of the special interests. And we see the influence that they have over our elected officials. And we see that when they make a determination that they don't want us to know the consequences of their action, and the consequences of the violence perpetrated by people that have guns or guns themselves, they are now influencing legislation. So the power of the special interests is what is so fearful to us all. And they end up enabling Dickey Amendment to be enacted, and now we have to fight to repeal that. So the trouble that we have here is not necessarily the one amendment. It's to make sure that we fight aggressively against the special interests. In this case, it's the NRA preventing us from knowing the real damage that guns cause. If I'm elected, not only will we fight the NRA on the Dickey Amendment and any legislation that prevents us from knowing the damage caused by guns, but really on special interests that prevent us from having some kind of transparency and knowing the consequences, the health consequences, to the violence that's caused by guns. We have to stop that. That's what we have to do. That's what I will do.
The fourth question will come from Brianna Ahrens, a senior at Randolph High School.
This issue of gun violence, it disproportionately affects people of color. How will you do a better job of considering their rights and protecting them?
The first candidate to answer will be Martin Hewitt.
Okay, well, obviously, this is a more complicated question, and I think we have to look at what's going on within those neighborhoods that is causing the problem. Yes, it does disproportionately affect neighborhoods of color. And why? Well, some of it has to do with the issue of social issues in terms of, for instance, the opioid epidemic automatic seems to gravitate towards poorer neighborhoods, and that is something that we have to address. But also, I think some of the things we can do along with education within certain neighborhoods is also to take a look at changing our outlook on things, such as the legalization of cannabis. I am in favor of that. The reason being it would have 3 different impacts. The most important ones here would be cleaning up the stream of distribution, meaning it would no longer be done on street corners, which is where crimes often are committed in inner cities. You'd also have the advantage of being able to then get more people out of prisons who are there for a minor case of selling marijuana. So I think we have to think about outside the box as to how to actually make sure that people are aware within the neighborhoods that they are at risk, why they are at risk, and also make sure that we have funds allocated to researching how to proceed and also move ahead with making sure that neighborhoods more affected by gun violence than others are alleviated in terms of or how to reduce the amount of gun violence there. Thank you.
So, as a federal prosecutor, I've seen for years how devastating the effect of gun violence is on our communities of color. And yes, they are indeed disproportionately affected by this violence, and it's been going on for quite a long time. I worked hard as a prosecutor and as an outreach coordinator to get guns off our streets. Part of the problems we have are trafficking laws. We need better anti-trafficking measures. So one of the cases I worked on, guns were coming in from North Carolina, and those guns weren't going to Montclair or Morristown. They were going to Newark and Camden. So we certainly have to make sure that we are getting guns off the streets because they really cause a devastating impact on many of our urban cities. We also need to make sure that we advocate for these better federal laws that we've been discussing here today. And we need to really look at the relationship between police and the communities they serve. So I think many of you remember in North Charleston that horrible shooting that we saw when Walter Scott was shot. The policeman who shot him was just convicted to 20 years in prison. We saw that because of an iPhone camera. We saw that Walter was about 50 yards away from the cop who shot him in the back. And we know what happened because of that iPhone. So we definitely need body cameras on the police so that victims can get the justice they deserve. We also need to make sure, though, that we're promoting that relationship with police and the communities they serve, because the majority of our police go into their jobs because they want to be heroes. They want to serve their communities. That's what they enter the force to do, and that's what many of them do so incredibly well. And when we work on that police and community relationship and build partnerships in those communities, we can help the police fulfill those missions, and then we can help them get the bad actors out of their forces. Thank you so much.
Black Lives Matter. This phrase has come out, and some people, when they hear it, they think, well, nobody else's life matters. But we have to bring focus to this problem, that in our society, it's not just gun violence, it's all kinds of issues where we arrest blacks and we arrest minorities and we arrest people of color more on drug charges than others, even though when we looked at the statistics, whites are just as likely to take drugs as people of color, but people of color get arrested more. Also, we see this with young people. I teach college, obviously, and I'm dealing with young people, and we talk all the time about DWI, that's driving while young. And a lot of them get stopped just because they're young. And a lot of people get stopped just because they are of a different color. Well, it's got to stop. It's not just about violence When people say Black Lives Matter, don't say that means nobody else's life matters. It's just we need to bring attention to this. And we need to bring attention that all lives matter. Thank you.
I think if we look to successes around the country, NYPD has done a marvelous job in terms of integrating their police force into the local communities. They've had sensitivity towards matching the ethnicity of the police officers with the community, and also diversity training among the police. And I think if we take that community engagement approach, it will help alleviate the gun violence.
It's hard for us to sometimes personalize how tragic gun violence is. And every once in a while we know somebody, maybe we know somebody that's been killed, but people in some communities do suffer more than others. And the answer that we have to try and find is, how do we stop the violence? Yes, we can focus on one community or another, but we have to follow the lead right now that's been given us, and we have to address the gun situation and not fall into the trap that's occurred for the last 10, 15, 20, 25, or 30 years by the NRA. What we have to do is not just little steps. We have to have a direct approach. And the very simple message that we have to have is, first of all, unify, follow the example of Parkland, and absolutely criminalize assault weapons. But it's more than that, to protect neighborhoods of color, to protect every neighborhood in this country. We have to absolutely have gun safety regulations put in place. We have to stop the boyfriend loophole. We have to stop the gun show loophole. We have to stop every instance where guns are being brought into this country and our communities illegally and used for improper purposes. So we have to act together, and we have to do that forcefully now, and that message cannot be tamped down in any way. We have to do that right now, and that's what I will pledge to do.
So, as the woman of color here on the panel, I will affirm that this is real. And as many of you know, I'm sure you've read in the media, but as a mother of two teenage daughters, my daughters have actually seen me stopped by the police, seen me harassed by the police, and seen the outcome. And so that conversation about the talk that people have with their sons, and the assault on black and brown bodies in this country is very real. And one of the things that I know is not even having to have those conversations with young boys of color way too early, in the criminalization and the stigmatization of their bodies. Young girls in the classroom who wear natural hair. There are all sorts of pathing that happen to young men and young women of color from the time they are in elementary school, middle school. I have worked in Sussex Elementary School in Newark. I have worked with young students in high schools. I have worked with people coming out of school and going on to college and dealing with issues like gun violence and violence in their communities from people who have been hired and are supposed to protect them. And then we have all of these issues that we see in the news, which I'm not going to talk about today. This is part of the reason I'm running for Congress. Because the way that we get to address some of these things is through exposure and education. And that's something that I've always believed in. And one of the things that I have done, in addition to my on-the-ground work, working with communities of color that experience this trauma and crisis on a daily basis, is also complement that by having people like the NYPD come into my social work class as I train the next generation of social workers, and making sure that there are partnerships and conversations and engagement, because that is how we are going to begin to address this protracted issue of violence and fear and trauma in communities of color. And we need leaders that are versed in this and can speak to this and have a pathway to try to make this a better outcome for all communities. Thank you.
The fifth question will be asked by Magana Madali, a sophomore at Morris Knowles.
Many believe that their right to maintain arms stems from the principle of protection. Do you think this is a valid argument? How do you respond to a concerned constituent who feels the need to protect themselves with firearms in their community?
The first candidate to respond will be Mikey Sherrill.
So we know where the right to keep and bear arms stems from. It's from the Second Amendment, which reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Unfortunately, I think that was incorrectly interpreted in DC versus Heller, a Supreme Court case, where they did not base the right to keep and bear arms on a well-regulated militia, which we need to do. That is the Second Amendment, and that's how it's traditionally been interpreted. That's how it should be interpreted. We also need to make sure that our Second Amendment doesn't exist in some sort of odd constitutional vacuum. So every first-year con law student can tell you that the amendments to the Constitution are not sacrosanct. They do not exist free from the need to keep our citizens safe. So for example, you can't yell fire in a movie theater even though you have the right to free speech, because that would be incredibly dangerous. And so we have to be able to regulate our firearms, balance the Second Amendment along with the needs to keep our citizens safe.
My job is being a historian, so I spent a lot of time in the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, and when the Second Amendment was passed in 1789, we were in the 18th century. It was a different time. We were pre-industrial age. We didn't have the type of guns that we have today. So setting up a law in the 18th century and trying to apply it to the 21st century has caused problems. Other countries have dealt with this. In 1987, Great Britain had that same issue. They had mass shooting. They dealt with it. Australia had the same problem. They had a mass shooting. They dealt with it. For some reason, though, we here in America are still saying, okay, well, it passed in the 18th century. We got to keep on with that. Well, no. As I've said, they've done studies, and the research shows that having a gun in your house makes you less safe. It doesn't make you more safe. I guess that's what the message we got to tell people. The NRA is not telling the truth to us. Yeah, maybe somebody one time or a few people win the lottery and they have a gun and that protects them. But for the most part, bringing a gun in your house makes it less safe for you and your family. And that's the message that we have to say. We're no longer living in the 18th century. We're now living in the 21st century.
I respectfully disagree with my opponents. When I returned from Angola, I was debriefed by the State Department, and there were determined to be credible threats against my life. I met with the local police department. We talked about the potential response time if there was an incident, and I determined that the best course of action at that time was to purchase a handgun, which I did. I went through all the proper gun safety courses. I went through background checks extensively, and I purchased that gun for my protection. So I do believe there is a place in society where there needs to be the balance that is being discussed here, but I do believe there's a right of protection in the Second Amendment.
Interesting. You're forcing me to vary a bit, because obviously, even within our society, we have the right at times to protect ourselves, and given the proper registration, given the proper police procedure, people do have the right to carry concealed weapons. But I think the question from a broader perspective is, do people have the right to have guns just simply to protect themselves, and just have the guns for that reason? Let's carry this a little bit further. logically. If I was now in my house and somebody came in with a gun, sure, I'd want a gun to protect myself. If I was outside and somebody else had a gun, I'd want a gun to protect myself. I'm from Brooklyn, back in the old days. And back in the old days, way back in the old days, when we had a fight, it was always fists, or maybe once in a while a chain. Fast forward 10 or 15 years, maybe knives. But now, whether it's in a disadvantaged neighborhood or not, if somebody has a gun, everyone around is going to try and have a gun in order to protect themselves from that person. So the answer is not to have everybody have a gun. The answer is to eliminate that many guns, and people that do not have the right to have guns should not have guns. So once again, it goes back to gun control and criminalizing the right, or the criminalizing assault weapons again, and having enough protections of all of us so that we reduce the number of guns. And let's look at examples like Australia and some of the other countries.
I'm gonna have to cut you off, sorry, a lot of time.
So again, because I come at this from a mental health and a public health and social work perspective, I always tell people I will fight vigorously for your right to bear arms, but what I will not fight for is your right to use the excess supply of arms in this country to impact children and everyone else's public health. We're in this journey together. So what I would say to a concerned constituent, is what I would say to anyone that's having a panic attack, an anxiety attack, or, struggling with a crisis. And I would say, what is the most immediate fear that you have? And we would talk about that fear. But one of the things that I would be working on to try to get that concerned constituent to think about is if they are living in a home with an abusive partner, the risk that having a gun in that house means to their ability to live in the event of an escalated dispute. If they have a gun in their home and they have a teenager or a young adolescent, a young child that is struggling with mental health problems, depression, impulse control, deep anxiety, or having a break, a psychotic break, what is the risk that that child will be alive if that gun is in the home? Because one of the statistics that we do know is when a gun is in a home, the probability of death or use of that gun by someone in the family comes from that home is exponential. And the other thing that we have to think about too is if you have a gun and you have a family member or someone in your immediate community, a loved one that is suicidal, has begun to ideate and think about using that gun to end their life, what happens when you facilitate that outcome by having that gun in the home? So I would sit with that concerned constituent. I would ask them what their fears and anxieties are. I would explain to them the risks, and I would try to see if we could have a partnership. But the first thing I would do is say, I sit and I understand and I'm listening. And we would work together to try to find an outcome that would hopefully result in the giving up of that gun. Thank you.
I think it's important to note that what you were saying earlier about your carrying a gun and your reasons for it, that's an example that could be quite valid, but think about it. What you were talking about was not getting a semi-automatic. You were talking about a handgun. You were not talking about not going through the normal procedures of background checks or education, etc. You did everything correctly. And therefore, I don't know if that's necessarily a problem in that circumstance. One thing we all have to realize is that there's exceptions to every rule. And that's why we have to create rules that are somewhat elastic. Obviously, we want to make sure that people who may need protection, depending on a number of factors that we can go into, are able to do that. But really, we are allowed to protect our homes. Some people, I don't know, for some reason what comes to mind is somebody in the Diamond District in New York at 2 in the morning or whatever. They may feel a little more comfortable having a handgun because the incidence of criminality at that point is fairly high. But that doesn't mean, and what we're talking about today is not the handgun. What I believe we're talking about is the weapons that are only around for one reason, which is mass murder. Ms. Harris is right, and there's a huge psychological component that has to be made with individuals, and there's another question further on down where we can speak more to it. But there may be circumstances where someone needs a gun, and they should not be necessarily deprived of that. But it has to be within the confines of the Second Amendment and not something that can be used for mass murder. Thank you.
The sixth question will come from Natalie Gamici, a junior at the Kent Place School.
How will you ensure the safety of those affected by domestic violence related to guns? What about police violence and guns?
The first candidate to answer will be Mark Washburn.
For years, I shared an office, or I was in the next office with a guy named Nick Irons. Many of you may know him, or many of you may have sat on his lap because for many years he was Santa Claus on the green in Morristown. And he was cop in Sparta for 25 years before becoming a college professor teaching criminal justice. And he used to tell me the easiest crimes to solve are murder crimes. And he said the easiest crimes to solve are murder crimes is because most likely the person who murders you, I hate to say this, look at the people next to you, are people you know. They're the people most likely to murder you. So I think in 1993 we had the Brady Bill, named after James Brady, who was shot while Ronald Reagan was being shot. And he was the press secretary for Reagan. And they came up with the Brady Bill, which called for background checks and also called for a waiting period. Now think about it. Shouldn't people have to wait a while, a few days at least, so that people could do a background check to see, okay, I just found out that my spouse has been cheating on me. Shouldn't that person have to go through a background check before they can get a gun, instead of being able to immediately get a gun? So I'm for the best thing I think we can do for people of domestic violence is to have background checks. Not give guns to people who are in a fit because they just learned their spouse cheated on them. I think it's important also to have waiting periods, that you have to wait a little bit before getting a gun so that people who just learn that their spouse is cheating on them, that they can take some time to cool off. That's what we need here in America.
I have worked for 40 years as a first responder, a volunteer first responder, and have worked extensively with the police department side by side. I have been involved specifically in domestic violence, gun issues, and I think number one is enforce the laws that are on the books. Get the guns out of the house if there's any hint of domestic violence. I certainly support universal background checks and determination of the mental health of the people there. I think that that along with, no, I think that's it.
I think this is an education for all of us, but I think we have to use this as an opportunity to understand how important the safety issues are and how important it is for us as a community, us as a state, and us as a country to make sure that there are the protections out there. So we have heard about the loopholes. We have to close the loopholes. And we have to make sure that we elect officials that are going to make sure that those loopholes are closed. We've talked about some of them. We've heard them here today. You'll hear more about them. But it's important that we all understand the importance of them. We have to stop the loopholes for gun shows. We have to stop the loopholes, the boyfriend loophole. We have to stop, we have to absolutely include background checks. We have to have waiting periods. And we have to train people. We have to have them understand why these are so important. And then we have to make sure that our elected officials enact these laws to protect all of us. And that's what I plan to do.
So for me, again, I come at this from a different direction. I think I had attended the West Essex High School walkout, and I was talking to a group of young women afterwards, and we were talking about the shooting in Parkland, and the fact that, you know, a lot of these experiences sometimes, there's a path and there's a history. So it's not a surprise when some of these sort of violent shootings happen in a school. You know, you have a kid that maybe was rejected by a girlfriend or had a fight with their girlfriend, and then they go on to be resentful and build up on a certain path. And domestic violence is a huge problem in this country. So what I had told those young women, who were all high schoolers and young adolescents, is look, toxic masculinity, toxic partnership, power and control dynamics build up from very early in life. And the inability to deal with distress and rejection and discomfort is identified very early on. If you're dating someone and they are making threats to you, or they are threatening violence, or you see that they have depressive outcomes and they're struggling, you have to have trusted people in their spaces so that young women can go to young men as well. And I think that, again, having a plan where you're arming teachers in school is a counter problem, is a counter solution to that problem. It's not effective. We have to have more social workers, more mental health workers with our young kids. And the other thing that I will say is, in the police force, you have some of the toughest, strongest, capable people, and they have crisis as well. They go through divorces, they have mental health challenges, they have emotional traumas if they have loss of loved ones or partnerships. And we have to make sure that people with the guns and people with the power, they are not social workers, they are protectors in our community, and they need resources and help as well when they're struggling, so that we can have protection on all parts. We have to be a model in New Jersey, in the nation, with our boyfriend loophole.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I think the most important issue in this is background check and psychological evaluation and counseling. Now, that being said, I was also at the West Essex High School that day, and there was a very brave young girl who was having a conversation with former Governor Cody, who made the statement that anyone who has ever suffered from mental illness should not own a gun. And this young girl said in front of everyone and said that she was making an admission she had never even told her friends, that she suffers from severe depression, but that she has no desire to hurt anyone. We can't make blanket statements without understanding, again, the exceptions. One thing I think of is the woman who is a victim of domestic violence. The husband, boyfriend, whatever, is now out of the house and there's a restraining order, and yet he's still threatening. Even if she is suffering from, or is getting counseling for post-traumatic stress, she may need a gun if she feels her life is in danger. She should not have one kept from her just because she has had psychological counseling. So I think it's important to take the larger view, take a step back, and again, the key here is background checks. Make sure that person with mental illness cannot just order online or go to a gun show and pick up a gun and walk right out. It has to be more difficult than that. That's what the problem is now. Is guns generally are too easily made available, and weapons of mass destruction, as I will call them and have called them earlier, are too easily available. So the key, as far as I'm concerned, is evaluating each individual, but making sure that we have the mechanisms in place to stop those who are a threat to others or themselves are kept from owning a weapon. Thank you.
You know, as I've been saying over and over the past year, we've got to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous people. And one of the ways we do that is to close the boyfriend loophole. We have to make sure that domestic abusers do not have access to firearms. We also, as far as police violence and guns, I spoke a little bit about what happened in North Charleston. I think body cameras are the first step, and that's a federal grant program that we need to make sure New Jersey cops have access to, so that we can get to the bottom of any investigation and bring justice to victims. However, when I think about this, I think about the gold standard, and to me, that's kind of my own community. I was just at my kids' elementary school, and I was with our deputy police chief. And I was talking to her, and I showed her a picture of my 12-year-old, who now is old enough to wander around the town center on Friday afternoons. And I said, look, this is my daughter, so if you have any cops out on the beat, you know, have them like tap her on the shoulder and tell her that they're watching her so she doesn't get into any trouble. Imagine the difference, though, between my reaction to our police force and the people in our inner cities who probably want to do every single thing possible that they can to keep their children off the radar of law enforcement. We have got to bring back community policing to many of our communities, and it does work. So I can tell you that after the attack on the African American church in Charleston, we got together in Newark because many of the leaders of our African American churches were very concerned about their safety and security. So we had a meeting with law enforcement, we had a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office, we had a meeting with the church leaders to make sure that we were all in partnership doing every single thing we could to keep our community safe. And that's policing at its best. Thanks.
The seventh question will be asked by Evie Mason, a sophomore at Chatham High School.
Do you feel that there should be more safety regulations in schools, such as metal detectors, ID badges, and overall stronger security?
The first candidate to answer will be Patrick Aloka.
I have two grandchildren, two granddaughters. One will be of school age later this year. I would be saddened to think that she would be attending a school that is a fortress, a prison-like environment. That's not what I want for her. I am not in favor of medical detectors, but I am in favor of taking a soft target and fortifying it in the sense that you have an armed guard or several armed guards that are there that are able to respond to any threat. Again, mental, inside the school, it's a two-prong attack. The second part, again, is mental health guidance counselors, someone in that school that can, whether it's a teacher referral, whatever, is able to deal with any mental health threats that may surface.
This is sort of a two-part question here. There are several ways to look at this. The easy way is to take the budget of a school and say, what can we do to protect our students? And there are physical things that they can do very quickly. They can have safety glass in doors and windows, they can have self-locking doors, and you can have a very strong identification system. Those are things you can and should do. There are also training things that you should do. You should have an HIV officer, you should have intimidation, bullying, harassment officers, somebody that can be approached when you see another student that exhibits red flags. You have to have some kind of communication so that all the students and teachers are trained to identify students or anyone else that might be of concern. But all of these are stopgap measures. Yes, they're going to prevent a lot. But what is the real issue that we have? And the real issue that we have, once again, is the guns and the weapons that are brought into school. And so we have to focus again on a common ground, common sense solution to each of the issues that we have. And the common ground, common sense solution, again, is following the lead of all the brave students that we've seen in Parkland here today, following the lead and voting for only officials, only people that are going to make sure that they protect our students, and that's what I intend to do.
I will never advocate for metal detectors and security in our schools. I think that we need to strengthen our teachers, give them support in the classroom. We need to add mental health workers and other first responders who can deal with the crises that happen in schools. We also need to encourage and support administrators in schools to come up with effective protocols, because as we saw in Parkland, this student was known to many. He was elected most likely to shoot up a school. He was suspended. This is not a surprise. I just finished having a conversation with a young lady in middle school. There's a kid that has pictures of guns on his Facebook page and has a list. And he's been suspended, but he was allowed back in the school. It's a matter of time. And if we hear about this at that school, then, you know, there'll be the kids that weren't surprised, hopefully if they survive whatever happens in this school. So having armed guards in a school and creating fortresses is what many young students in communities of color in our country already live in Chicago and Detroit. I am not for the advocacy of that, because one of the things that I work so vigorously on is trying to impact that school to prison pipeline that happens in communities of color. And I don't want to see that in any community. So I am for the securing of additional mental health workers in our schools, for the resources for teachers to actually teach in our school, and if we have security officers in our school, really understanding what the safety plan is for students so that when they walk in those doors and they see a school safety officer, they know that they're protected. Because as we saw in Parkland, and as we see in other circumstances, sometimes when the shootings go down, people are not in the room until it dies down, and then everyone rushes in to go and be the protector. So we have to keep it real, we have to keep talking about this, and we have to come up with real viable solutions. But I am never for making our schools where our kids have to be a fortress. Thank you.
I think it's a combination of factors that we have to consider. One, I agree we need to have more psychological counseling. We have to have everyone in the schools aware of warning signs. I think there were plenty down in Parkland that were ignored or misinterpreted or misunderstood. Interestingly, when we were at West Essex High School that day, I was talking to a lot of students, because again, it's not necessarily what we up here on the stage want. It's also what the students, what makes them feel comfortable going to school. And believe it or not, a lot of them said they want metal detectors. They feel more comfortable that way. Now, whether I would want to go to a school that way or anyone up here would, that's not the question. The question is what will also give young adults in high school the comfort they need to go to school and feel confident that there's not going to be an incident. I do think that there should be guards, not at every, not around the perimeter, but certainly there should be a police officer stationed at entrances, and those entrances should require, should be locked, and should be, people should be escorted through the hallways if they're there for various reasons other than if they're a student, and even the students themselves. But again, this begs a question, and that question is the availability of assault rifles and automatic weapons. And if we can get those off the street, at least we're making a big, big step forward in reducing the possibility for a mass murder. True, you don't want anything to get into the school at all. Occasionally, unfortunately, it has happened in the past. Hopefully it never will in the future, but we're all more realistic. The only thing I'll leave you with is I do not believe teachers should have guns. I will tell you what my daughter said, who is a school teacher, which is, Dad, I have enough problems someday with a copying machine. I don't need a gun. Thank you.
So I worked at one of my jobs in one of the tallest buildings in Manhattan on 53rd and Lex, the old Citigroup building. And that building went through some various safety and security measures after 9/11 happened to ensure that it was a safe place for people to work. I think we need to take a professional look at our schools and determine the best way to protect those buildings and to keep children safe. In the meantime, I do think having school safety officers, either retired cops or off-duty cops present, is a good idea. However, I'd like to ensure that we are getting federal grant money to keep our schools safe, because here in New Jersey we have the second best public school system in the nation, and so we really want to devote our resources to keeping our academics high in this state, and not devote them to school safety measures if at all possible. That said, I also think we should not have, the teachers should not be armed. So I have a lot of family members who are teachers, including my sister, who is about my size and teaches in the high school. And I was talking to her and a group of friends about arming teachers, and she said, she has a classroom where there are 13 boys in her classroom. And after everyone kind of got over how bad that classroom must really smell at the end of the day, we all agreed that arming my sister was not a great idea, because disarming my sister would be not that hard. And she's actually quite a good shot as well, and is very familiar with gun safety regulations. But really, we don't need to add more guns to the situation in our schools. Thanks.
As a teacher, this brings it home to me. I start off each one of my classes with current events. I have one of my students right in the second row there. And I started off, and I had to, unfortunately, have to do school shooting now almost twice a year. This year was Kentucky. We talked about Parkland. Last year was about Las Vegas. I know that was the school, but I've been doing this since 1999 with Columbine. And we've been talking about shootings, and I asked my students, well, what should we do? Should we have metal detectors? Would you want that? And a couple say yes, but most say no. They would say that would just make the perimeter smaller, but doesn't solve anything, right? They can shoot you before you get into the school as you're in the parking lot. So that wasn't a real good solution. But the thing to do is to go on with your life. I have never been threatened in school, but I did have an incident in 2013. I ran the Boston Marathon that year. And I finished, but my wife was on the street for about 15 minutes right before the bomb went off. And she was able to, obviously, she was okay, but that was frightening for us. But I think the message that we got was, okay, are we going to let that scare us for the rest of our lives? And we said no, and we've come back every year. And next Monday, a week from Monday, I will be there again, running the Boston Marathon. And I think that's the message we need to give to the young people, that we can't be afraid, that we can't let these people who have frightened us win the day, that we have to take back our schools, we have to take back our lives, and continue to just go on despite what had happened to us in the past.
The 8th question will come from Bella Bamani.
How do you feel about students being the ones to lead this movement, and do you fully support the students?
The first candidate to answer will be Mitchell Cobert.
I think my generation and the ones around it have failed our students. And our students have now, from Parkland on, shown us the example of how they can lead. The 11th for Change has shown me, personally, how significant it can be for the community to get involved and make a change. I wouldn't be running if it wasn't for the enthusiasm of the 11th for Change, showing how concerned, qualified citizens can make a difference. We have to take the lead of the students, and we have to continue it. I applaud every student, and I want to say that when I spoke to one of the Parkland students afterwards, what he said was important to all of the other students who were around at the time. And what he said was, they've reached out to only one student in some of the schools, and that one student was able to rally so many of the other students and teachers and administration of that school that that's what's allowing this rally to continue. So I applaud every student from Parkland on, every student in every high school, in every school in this country to continue this fight, because that's the only way we can get it done. We, the people, have to resume our obligation to take back the people's house, the House of Representatives, and that's what I hope to do.
So yes, I fully support the students. I'm so proud of you. And as the mother of 2 teenage daughters, I couldn't be more inspired by what you're doing. You're a model. And it's something that I tell my daughters every day, that, you know, we don't value voices we don't hear. So the fact that you are using your voice to bring power to this message is powerful. The thing that I would tell you is, in terms of support, is that you are on the front lines now, and part of a wave that has proceeded by, has been sort of engaged by previous generations. So you stand on shoulders. You're not alone in this journey, and I know a lot of this energy and passion and commitment and investment and engagement has come out of trauma and a real fear for your future. And, I want to say that we failed you as adults, but I don't believe that, because that's why I'm running for Congress. We're here to be your flank. and the young bloods are going to get it done. But we as adults have to show up in spaces so that as you begin to shape and define the narrative that's powerful for you, we can then help to implement policy to support you around that. So I'm going to leave you with an acronym I give my daughters, which is STEM, right? Whenever you're trying to sort of blossom and grow into something powerful, you have to have a strong STEM, and that is support. You must be supported. You cannot do this by yourself. So you have to embrace each other, you have to stick together, and you have to support one another. T is you have to make sure you know how tenacious you want to be. Because this game that you're playing, especially around gun violence and gun reform, is a long game. It's not a short game. So you're going to get a little bit done, and then you're going to need to bring on others. And then E is making sure that you're getting your emotional support. Because this is around trauma and stress. So make sure you're taking care of yourselves and get help and talk to people if you feel that it's overwhelming. And the last piece is the movement. Really be clear about the movement that you're trying to create, because I always say confusion in advocacy is death. And when we're talking about gun violence, that is real. So stay encouraged, stay blessed. I'm running to represent you and work hard for you, and I will do everything I can to support you, in and out of Congress. Thank you.
It sounds almost condescending to say I'm proud of the students, and yet I am. And I fully support you. But you have to understand, and I think others have already said this, you have to take the long view. The civil rights movement back in the 60s, it was the students who are now some of the older, grayer people here, myself among them. But we remember that, and we see that fire in your eyes, and it's encouraging to us. And while I do believe that the older generations have failed you, there are those of us here who see the light as well as you do and want to march forward with you. So don't ever give up. Understand that you are empowered. Understand that there will be days where you feel like you're not making any progress. All I can say is just push forward even more. And together we will all get there. It's definitely a project that involves all of us, but you students are the future, and don't ever forget that.
Yes, I fully support the students. I am so incredibly impressed with all of you. I'll tell you, I was sitting at the March for Our Lives listening to just the wonderful speeches made by everyone, and someone leaned over and said, well, the good news is they're not old enough to run against you. And I couldn't agree more, because you are all so eloquent and so amazing at what you're doing. As I say, I've gone through several emotions over the course of the gun safety discussion in this country. I remember when Columbine happened and I was devastated and shocked. I remember when Sandy Hook happened and I was horrified. I had a kindergartner at the time. And then when Parkland happened, I just felt rage. I was so angry that we had not done more by now to protect our kids. That after all this time, when we see students from Columbine in their late 30s, that we still haven't passed good gun safety legislation safety legislation that will keep our kids safe. And yet afterwards, when I went and heard the kids from Parkland speaking in Livingston, and then when I went and heard our students here in our district speaking, I have felt an incredible amount of hope. And yes, you have to be tenacious, and yes, you have to keep pushing this issue, but you are already motivating the next group of students who will come forward and do that. And I know that because shortly before the walkout, my daughter came up to me and she kind of casually said, oh, did you know I'm on the walkout committee at my school? And I said, no, I didn't know that. She's 12 in her middle school. And she said, yes, I went up to the principal and I told him that I really think we need to work on this walkout. And he said, well, why don't you join the committee to do that? And she did so. And I know that's because of all the work that you guys have been doing, and she's heard me talk about it and how engaged she was in your fight. So I can tell you that we have people that will continue the fight.
One of the privileges of my life is being a teacher. I was in business until I was 35, 36, and I got an opportunity to work with young people. And I think of myself as the teacher, but really I'm the student. I've learned so much from them over the years, so I'm not really surprised that students are behind this. They're the ones who inherit this world that we're getting. You guys have done a great job in doing this. I'm just so proud of everything you guys have done.
That Martin and I are the only two Republicans here on this panel. I believe that an educated, informed, and engaged electorate is our nation's greatest hope. And that's what you are doing. You are bringing and inciting the democratic process. And quite honestly, that's why I accepted your invitation, because of your professionalism and your ability to organize. Extremely impressive. Thank you.
This will be the last question. The 9th question will be asked by Brianna Ahrens.
How do you think campaign finance law contributes to the NRA's hold on Congress, and what will you do to stop it?
The first person to answer will be Tamara Harris.
So I think that we need to get dark money out of our special interest groups. I think that's the number one imperative. Clearly ending Citizens United and all of that is important. But I do think that, making sure that we have a democratic process and getting effective legislators to that journey will be the most powerful way to break campaign finance law. You've got to elect officials that actually have a dedicated mission to really, like I said, release the grip that special interests have on their constituents and on decisions that severely and adversely impact their quality of life. So that's number one. But number two, I think more importantly, is we look at the NRA and some of the effective ways that money gets funneled in addition from campaign financing for congresspeople and through lobbyists, is making sure that our tax laws, and especially tax laws that provide funding for nonprofit organizations and special designations, don't allow the use of this money to do things like fund schools where kids learn to shoot guns. I think it's very important to take a fine-tooth comb and look at all of these organizations and see where they are using all aspects of federal financing opportunities, loopholes, and different structures to ensure that this money gets funneled. As you can see, we're looking at where money has come into the NRA, and it's not just domestically. I mean, this is under investigation, and people are following traces of money from outside our country. Our democracy is really in crisis and under attack. And we have to have leadership that is not going to be afraid to speak truth to power and demand that sunlight be shown on where all the tax records are, where this money is being provided from, and it's not just any more financing in this country, but we have to look at external sources as well internationally. Thank you.
As I said earlier, I will support the 28th Amendment to remove money from the political equation. Before that, though, I have also taken a pledge not to accept PAC or corporate money, which means that in true Republican style, I am running a fiscally conservative campaign. But that being said, we all have to work so hard to make sure that big money is removed from the equation, to make sure that money is not what determines who wins or who loses. It should be based on our ideas, our beliefs. One thing I think that all of you should get to do in the coming, only 7.5 weeks till the primary, I believe it is to get to know all of us better. Because it isn't about how much money we have in the bank, it's about what we stand for, what we believe in, and how that relates to all of you. What I think is, at some point, somebody, I hope myself, will actually get to Congress without millions of dollars behind him or her. We have to get the big money out. It is possible, but as a community, we have to do it by making contributions to the smaller campaigns, to make sure that we don't just sit by and say, oh, well, there's millions here, millions there, what can we do? Well, I think Bernie Sanders proved pretty quickly that little donations become very big and powerful organizations, pays for big and powerful organizations pretty quickly. So the power is not in the big donors' hands, it's in all of your hands. And the only way to remove big money is for all of you to get more involved and do what you can. And obviously the students here today are as involved as it gets. So let's all work together, learn about all of us, and get big money out by looking at the best candidates, not necessarily the biggest bank account. Thank you.
So I spoke a little bit about this previously. I think the NRA does have, or has had in the past, a stranglehold on some of our gun safety legislation and our initiatives. We heard a little bit about the Dickey Amendment. As I discussed earlier, we've traced about $500 million that they've put into campaigns and to lobbying people, and that's just the money we know about. Most people would agree it's quite a bit more that we don't know about. What do we do to fix this? I think we need to end Citizens United. I think we need to ensure we have laws on the books so we can trace the finances in our government, and I think we need to make sure that we're looking very clearly at transparency laws on campaign finance disclosure.
Again, I am the only candidate up here who is not taking money from anyone. I want to give you a choice. A choice, instead of picking somebody who had the support of the NRA or the insurance company or some mayor or some state senator or some governor, right? You have a choice, and you know, they show up with these people, and what are these people gonna want afterwards? I'm not showing up with anybody. I'm not asking any money from anybody because I want to represent you. If you're a student and you have never given money to a campaign, you have a shot with me. If you're a student and you're wanting to support somebody who's taking money from a lot of different people, the people who give money, they're going to get the first shot at you. And I wanted to give you that choice. I wanted to give you that opportunity that if you want to get money out of politics, if you want to make sure the NRA, the insurance companies, the manufacturing companies don't have the sway over your politicians, then stop choosing people who are taking money from a lot of different groups, right? You have a choice this time, and I hope you select me. Thank you.
So how can a freshman congressman go up against the big bad NRA and other special interest groups? Again, you take back your country. You go out there, you engage, you vote on the issues, you tell your congressperson what you want. How am I personally going to do it? Well, I'm going to take my platform and roll it out to all 435 congressional districts. So a town hall meeting that will occur at least monthly, and maybe more with Facebook Live, but it will say, here are the bills that were, since our last town hall meeting, here are the bills that were voted on. Here's how you, the people, voted on those bills. Here's how your congressperson voted on those bills. And this is the percentage of times that your congressperson voted along with the will of the people. And then we'll rank all 435 congressmen and women around the country and let them know how they back up their vote to the people. That's how you marginalize special interests and you take your country back.
The focus here is to win back our country from the special interests, in this case, the NRA. It's too easy to blame Citizens United, and it's going to be too difficult to overturn that, given circumstances. But Justice Scalia has very, very clearly said that there are ways that we can do it, and we do have the right to regulate safety in this country. What I plan to do is to propose legislation that can accomplish that purpose. What we can do, which would be clearly legal, would be to amend contribution limits. So let's not fall into the trap where we feel as if the NRA can tell us what's legal and what's not legal. We can propose legislation, and we as new voters, and we as aggressive people interested in voting, can make sure that we pass legislation that will control special interests. That's part of the problem here, and we have to be very aggressive to control special interests and make sure that they do not take over and control the message that's being sent. It's our message to send back, and we have to pass legislation to do that, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you all so much for coming. Can we have another round of applause for everyone up on the stage? Thank you all to the candidates who came out today. We appreciate your cooperation in our mission to make gun violence a thing of the past. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to the audience for supporting our common goal of making the United States a better place. Thank you to the press for covering our event, and thank you obviously to all of the amazing students up here and all of you in the crowd. Without you, this whole march, everything wouldn't be possible. Students will be available for interview up in the front after the event is over. Thank you again.